the RTÉ Rugby World Cup podcast, sponsored by Bank of Ireland.
Hello and welcome along to another RTÉ Rugby World Cup podcast. It's 2 out of 2 for Ireland in France. Big winners against Tonga on Saturday night in Nantes. But the starters are now finished. The main course is coming up this weekend. Ireland versus South Africa at Stade de France in Paris. First against second in the world, live on RT2 and RT Player. Commentary also on RT Radio 1 this weekend. And I've got BJ Botha and Mick Kearney with me today for the first of our 2 podcasts this week. Fellas, welcome. Mick, it feels like the World Cup is very much starting this week after a couple of nice little blowouts.
Absolutely, Neil. As you mentioned there, the starters were over. The main courses are about to kick in. You can almost feel it countrywide, level of excitement going into this weekend. And I know even personally, I'm very excited for the game ahead.
BJ, we'll go into the real detail of it as we go on in the podcast. But alongside France and New Zealand, like, this is the biggest game of the pool stage in general. As I mentioned, first against second in the world. And even if you look at the ranking points, I think there's 0.15 ranking points between Ireland and South Africa. You're talking the difference in a cigarette paper between the two teams, aren't you?
Yeah, there's no doubt. Cheers for having me on again, Neil. And I think on that note, I think it's bigger. I think New Zealand have obviously shown coming into the tournament they haven't been on form at all. So France aside, this is no doubt the biggest game of the tournament, and we've seen it being built up, and the build up's been great. Both sides have come through their games. There's been no real kind of slip ups, if you want to call that. And I think they're building nicely towards quite a pinnacle in the World Cup.
Yeah. So we'll get right into it now, because we're recording here. It's late Tuesday morning. South Africa are going to be naming their team in a few hours' time. So by the time the podcast is up, and by the time a lot of people will be listening to this, South Africa will probably have named their match day 23 for the weekend. Ireland are going to be naming theirs on Thursday. But let's start with Ireland. Big win against Tonga at the weekend. Another 8 tries, 59-16 winners in the end. It was a disappointing Tonga, Mick, that Ireland ran out comfortable winners, where Tonga ran out of gas really in the second half, and not getting carried away by the standard of opposition. But it was an improved performance from Romania all in all, wasn't it?
No, look, very much so. Like, as you mentioned, Tonga ran out of steam, no doubt about it. But be a huge amount of positives for Ireland to take from that game, particularly going into South Africa. Naturally, the Tongans are enormous men, and they still only managed to get 37% gain line carries during the game, and like, I'd imagine, BJ, you'd know better than me, just from watching it, I'd say South Africa have had harder training sessions than they had against Romania the last day, so in terms of coming into this fixture, I'd imagine Ireland are delighted, regardless of how good Tonga were, that they were able to have a really stern physical challenge before going into this week.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And I think, it's always one that you want to kind of, as I mentioned, I think last week, just to get the health, everyone kind of healthy and uninjured. And that's what's happened now to Ireland. They've come through then this kind of big, physical game. So I think they're definitely in a great position, coming through, as you mentioned, Romania. It doesn't do you kind of as well. Definitely have more physical training sessions. So yeah, there's no doubt. And I suppose from an Irish perspective, I definitely think they, even though the Tonga were probably quite poor, they definitely thought they made the most of the opportunities. I thought they could have been a little bit more clinical, but I think that's what happens when the game does run away a little bit. I mean, some of their set piece, and especially around the areas of striking in the 22, which they're really going to have to be, clinical against South Africa to make those points, kind of turn over.
Yeah.
No, I completely...
Go ahead.
Sorry, Neil, I was just going to say, completely agree with you there. Like, Ireland they had 16 entries into the Tonga 22, came away with 8 tries. Against a team like South Africa, you're going to have to come away with points from every entry. It's obviously something Ireland did very well in the autumn, took their opportunities really well when they got into that area. So on our front, fingers crossed they can do that again this week.
Yeah, on the flip side of that point then, Mick, as well, though, and I know maybe you're probably not going to get as many chances against South Africa, so you probably have to be a bit more clinical, but even going back as far as the summer tour of New Zealand, like in those second and third tests in particular, the amount of 22 opportunities and the amount of chances to score tries that Ireland had in the first halves of those games and ultimately left behind them, but still got away with it. So, like, I don't know, is there an element there that Ireland are in a position where they're able to create so many chances that they can afford to be a little bit wasteful, or do you still think that they're going to get so few opportunities against South Africa this weekend that they pretty much have to make all of them count?
I feel this week against a team like South Africa, with the amount of breakdown threats that they have, the level of accuracy that we're going to need to have in attack and around the breakdown, and even, having a look at that game from the autumn yesterday, like the intent that Ireland were entering breakdowns at, you could see that they'd obviously put a massive focus on it through the week. I think if it's a tight game, which, I'd say it will be around 50 minutes, when South Africa do roll on that bomb squad, if Mbonambi, I can't imagine he will come off at 50, but if he did, you've the likes of Dion Free coming on, a massive breakdown threat. You've Marco van Staden coming on, another massive breakdown threat. Dwayne Vermeulen, good over the ball as well. So, on your point of Ireland maybe leaving a few behind them in the first half of the New Zealand series games, I think they're going to need to be on another level this weekend against the Springboks.
And just on that, I suppose they're not really in one sense doing that as per the game plan. I will say they're obviously a side that can play that 9, 10, 11, 12 phases and be quite happy to do that. If that defense doesn't really kill you at the breakdown. And I suppose in the game this weekend coming up, I suppose they're going to have to change that a bit, because South Africa comes so hard there that they're going to have to make sure they get over that advantage line in the second, third phase. They won't be able to. I think they'll be running into wouldn't say problems, but areas that they need to then kick or exit or kind of find another solution to get behind the South Africans, and that's going to put them in kind of a no man's land again.
On to continue on the wastefulness theme, once it clicked, everything started to work a lot better, Mick. Like if you look at, I counted up there yesterday, I think it was 4 or 5 lineouts, either just inside or just outside the 22 before they finally got that breakthrough. But it felt like once they got over for that try, once they had the disallowed try, even, because I think there was a try coming at that point, but once they got in and got that bit of a breakthrough, you could see everything started to click a little bit more. The ball was going to hand, the ball was sticking in hands a lot more, and in that second quarter of the game, they end up scoring 4 tries.
Definitely. And I think that was just pressure. Like, naturally, the Tongans were going to come out in the first 20 minutes full of piss and vinegar and try and kill Ireland with every contact. And thankfully, Ireland managed to weather the storm there very well. But Ireland's ability just to stick to task, I thought, was very impressive. Their level of detail. Even if you look at Johnny Sexton's try, obviously hit up in midfield with Bundee. There's an unbelievably deep clean on the corner there of the ruck. Ball goes out to Johnny. He throws a skip inside pass to Caelan Doris, who goes through the hole that the Tonga players haven't been able to fold into, because the lads cleaning that ruck have gone that bit deeper than they usually would. I didn't think Ireland gave a huge amount away around the set piece. Like, James Ryan took a massive amount of ball on himself in the middle. I thought Ronan Kelleher threw exceptionally well for the first 50 minutes or for the time that he was on, which will give Ireland a huge amount of confidence too, if Dan Sheehan maybe isn't 100% going into this game.
Yeah, that lineout was a talking point not just coming into this match, BJ, but pretty much it's been hanging around all summer, just the inconsistency of the Irish lineout. And I know it's similar to Romania last week, where everything positive we say, we're kind of adding, well, Tonga ultimately weren't particularly up to scratch, and they contested a lot of ball in the first half, Tonga, not particularly well. But to look down at the statistics, you see Ireland with 21 out of 23 lineouts. Those 2 lost lineouts came in the final 5 minutes of the game when it was completely done and dusted. Ronan Kelleher played the first half 11 out of 11 lineouts, good variety between what they were trying to do, between 5, 6, 7-man lineouts, balls to the middle, balls to the front, and kept Tonga guessing. All in all, it was a much sharper, more efficient performance from the Irish lineout from what we've seen over the last while. And as we say, I know South Africa are going to pose a way greater threat there. But from an Irish point of view, it's promising to see what they were doing at the weekend.
Yeah, there's no doubt, and you can clearly see that it's running like a well-oiled machine, and really crisp throwing, great taking in the line out. And look, I think we're going to see a different line out, I suppose. A little bit what Ireland obviously did against South Africa. We might see variations at the back. I think we'll see that kind of getting that player over the 15 that did it before. But their line out is really running well. The one aspect I would say that I think where they were tested a bit by Tonga is the maul, and a couple of times they were broken out quite easily, and that setting of the maul, which obviously South Africa come at you. So the one area they definitely have to set that base is the maul. We'll see how that kind of comes about, but we know South Africa, you have to at some stage maul them and kind of put that dominance down either there and in the scrum. So, look, I think they're going into this game with the kind of South Africa obviously going to be coming at them with defensive and obviously from a more defensive perspective. It's one area that you can really drive down and hopefully then curtail that hard defense that South Africa brings.
Mick, on the maul, it isn't something that Ireland have made a real weapon over the last few months. Like for a start, they've found themselves in that position where it's cleaned up maybe in the last few games, but giving away those obstruction penalties was something that was hanging over them for a little while. But aside from Caelan Doris's try at the weekend, they aren't scoring half as many tries directly from a maul as other sides. Like you see, a lot of the time they're kind of using it to set up and break away and, have someone like Dan Sheehan folding up around the corner outside it. But would you expect them to go hard at them all this weekend if it's not necessarily something that's been too fruitful for them over the last few months?
I think they will do quite a bit of mauling this week. Obviously South Africa are enormous men, extremely athletic as well, but in my mind I think there's going to be an element of trying to take their legs, in phase play, trying to get to edges, not play in between the 15s too much, so that the South African players are obviously moving a little bit more, and then fingers crossed they'll be able to expose a couple of mismatches against the likes of Malherbe and these kind of guys who late in the game tend to run out of steam before the bomb squad is rolled on. But to answer your question, I think a lot of credit has to go to kind of the maul defense as well. I thought Ireland mauled exceptionally well against New Zealand during that series last year. They're obviously keen to get Dan Sheehan around the corner into the seam with 12 running off him and wingers out the back and that kind of stuff. But the reason those plays have been opened up is because Ireland's maul in the last number of years has been a weapon that they've gone to. This week's going to be really interesting in my opinion in terms of the maul, because South Africa obviously sits so deep in the lineout. In terms of the two pods that they have, as BJ mentioned, Ireland had to throw over the 15 a huge amount during that autumn game, just to try and keep that pod pinned back from a South African point of view, or else they had to throw to the 5, and like Josh van der Flier squeezed in, as you said, by a cigarette paper to get that maul try in the autumn. But fingers crossed, again, as I said before, they can get a bit of headway on that maul, and that will open up a few more opportunities to break into the seam.
And then obviously on that we obviously got not our best from a South African perspective, playing marks, and we know that kind of when Bundee does, get that little bit of pressure, from Ireland's perspective, I think they will definitely go at them there. That doubt, kind of will come in from South Africans line out. I'm not saying that that they don't have the ability to kind of fix it, but there's no doubt that Ireland will know that Bundee would be the only recognised thrower and put them under pressure. They will hope to kind of overflow into the game.
done a lot of talk on the forwards. One part I do want to mention, and we'll touch a bit in the backs in a couple of minutes, but on the scrum, what are your confidence levels, Mick, in the Irish scrum, where it was decent? They won some penalties at the weekend, but what seems to be happening a lot with the Irish scrum is even on the good days, the scrums are very messy. You know, there's the potential there for a lot of 50-50 calls and for a lot of interpretation for the referee. Are they leaving a lot up to chance in the scrum, or are you confident with how they're going there?
I'd be pretty confident in the guys we have in there in terms of obviously managing referees, managing weight around the bind and that kind of stuff. BJ be far better at speaking about this kind of stuff as I would, because as a player, it was just stick your head in there and push as hard as you can. But this week is going to be a different beast altogether. You know, the weight that South Africa have, the connection and togetherness, like they're an unbelievably dangerous proposition. Couple that with the fact that they've 6 fresh forwards coming on, or 5 fresh forwards. If, as I mentioned, if Dion Free doesn't come on for,
who knows, maybe it's going to be 7. Who knows?
It could be 7. That was mentioned. So it's it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, to flip it to you, BJ, what are your confidence levels in what the Springboks scrum can do to Ireland?
Yes, look, I mean, I think this is one area that South Africa have to go at Ireland, not because of the fact that what the Ireland scrum, brings about, but South Africa. I suppose if we look at South Africa, this is one area that they have to cradle the momentum. They've shown it, time and time again. There was a little bit of a grey area against Scotland, and they have shown a little bit of light there, where you can go at Malherbe and the tight head side if you do stick to your guns. However, again, as South Africa has done very well, is real-time reaction in the game. They fixed it the following game and they got a penalty. So that momentum is only there for a little while, and I suppose important parts of the game, it needs to be done in the right parts of the game, and Ireland will have to choose which scrums they go for and not. I think, again, getting back to personnel, Bundee is our strongest scrummager. So I think that the scrum will be at its strongest, for South Africa. But that aside, I think there's no doubt that the Irish scrum can hold up and even have a good go at the South African scrum. But what's behind that, I think, has always been my concern in depth. So if they can hold their kind of tight 5 together, I believe they definitely hold parity there. But it's probably one area I would say South Africans are and the pack itself is going to hopefully go and try and get some dominance, and hopefully that again overflows to other parts of the game.
When we've been talking about Dion Fourie, a lot of the focus has been on how good of a lineout thrower he is when he's going to be on the pitch. How good of a scrummager is he at hooker?
Good question. And this is probably the area that I would not dwell too deep in, and hope that Bundee plays again enough minutes to kind of get away with it. But yeah, I'm not too sure the combination around the scrumming side. Like, he has played. I mean, he's not like he's he's kind of built like a hooker. If you call it, he's not built like Marks, but I suppose kind of Bundee's just a little bit bigger than him, and he's short and squat, and so I think he would fit in there quite nicely. Now, I don't know so much about obviously Marco van Staden and how he's fitting there, but again, it's I would say if Bundee goes off, it's a real concern of how those systems work, because it doesn't happen overnight. You kind of hopefully cover and paste it with the guys next to him from experience, loose set like Kitsoff and Malherbe, that hopefully will look after him. But it's an area that's that we hope that Bundee can kind of do the business. As I said, Bundee's our strongest scrummager. There's no doubt about that. And if he stays in the field and we go with that, I think we'll do well. But there's obviously concern about who's back up there.
Interesting. What was I going to say? Oh yes, obviously the star man Mick over these couple of games. There've been a good few star performers, but the standout player is Bundee Aki, and Ireland's ability or inability to get him involved in the game and find him good running lines and good opportunities to attack up the center of the pitch is going to be vital this weekend, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think it's going to be really interesting around Bundee this week is whether he's going to be kind of neutralized or not by Dale Andy. Because naturally
it's a great individual battle going on there, isn't it?
Yeah, it's huge, colossal battle. Like Ireland have played against Romania and Tonga. No disrespect to those teams, but I wouldn't be massively worried about their 12s going into a game. Whereas Bundee coming up against Dale Andy, it's going to be like the first contact is just going to be an explosion. It's almost something that you'd get up in the middle of the night to watch. So I'm really excited to see how Ireland get him into the game, and how they, give him an opportunity to run one of his trademark lines and hopefully get a soft shoulder.
I think on that as well, I think obviously we saw when South Africa did play Ireland early in the year as well. And in regards to also the last time they played and again then against Scotland, how Jesse Kriel, if he does play, causes that little bit of a dogleg at times, and I think that threat that Bundee will bring there into that channel, I think Ireland will hope that Jesse will kind of, hopefully have the same reaction, because I think that's where kind of Ireland, I think, will kind of use Bundee. The threat is because if you don't tackle him man on man, if you don't have, it doesn't matter. He's in good form. Doesn't matter who's in the midfield. For me, Damien is a great defender. However, he still needs to stop him on the advantage line, And to have that, you have to have Kriel again holding into that channel. And if he does come too far out, then it's obviously got the opportunity. Like Ireland have got such good hands that they get it out to width. And that's where the cross cover then has to do the damage for us. And if they don't, then obviously it'll be a try every time. So that's going to be key, I think, how Bundee works that channel, how Ireland obviously work that channel around Kriel as well, if he's selected.
And Mick, is the flip side of that coin then, how important is it what Ireland do when they don't use Bundee Aki, and creating the pictures and focusing the South Africa defence on Bundee Aki charging up the middle and potentially taking on a big hard line, but letting him run that line and use that as the decoy to get the ball out wide?
Yeah, as I mentioned, Bundee's almost like an effective maul at the moment. Sorry, lads. Bundee's almost like an effective maul at the moment, in the sense that, let's take South Africa, for example. They have an unbelievably strong maul. And as a result of having that maul, they can do trick plays off it, because teams are going to commit. They're going to put bodies into that space. That's very much what Bundee's like in the centre at the moment. If Ireland use him effectively as a decoy, hopefully it's a case of, as BJ mentioned, Jesse Kriel is kind of second guessing as to whether he's going to need to come in and hit him with his inside shoulder with Dale Andy. And, then, there could be opportunities out the back to Gary to spin it wide, or out the back to Hugo if he's coming in from 15.
And that Springbok defence, BJ, in the last couple of months, it has been pretty miserly. 10 points conceded over 3 games. Okay, one of them's against Romania, but 2 of those games are still against New Zealand and Scotland, where they've conceded 1 try and 10 points in total across those couple. Bernard Jackman gave a really good explainer on just how efficient they are defensively on against the head last night, using examples from when Ireland and South Africa played back in November. Obviously, they're going to have a massive say in how this weekend goes and just how aggressive they are. They do leave a lot of space out wide. They're a very, very narrow defence, but what recent history has shown us is that they're a very, very effective defence as well.
Yeah, that's kind of, I think, big talking point around this. And I think that's going to be really a crux against how Ireland manage the ruck speed. I think managing the ruck speed is going to be key, as we've always said. And I think South Africa are just going to be same game and just getting off the line, closing that door on the outside every single time if Ireland do not manage that ruck speed. And we saw parts of the ruck really and the breakdown against Tonga. Tonga managed to get a few hands in there, you know, and they did challenge them around that area. So we know how hard South Africa come at that breakdown. Once they make the tackle, they're on their feet and they're counter-rucking, and it's messy at times. And then, nines get frustrated, and kind of that kind of then's a knock-on effect, and then defense are kind of on the front foot. So we're going to definitely, and it's something else to watch, that line speed, and obviously coming off that line. But again, I think it's going to come back to that breakdown, how efficient it is, and that's basically a knock-on effect of if the ball carrier gets over the advantage line, and if they do manage that, it's going to just lengthen that kind of ruck, and it's going to put them just a step back, and they're not going to get that same speed. And then Ireland will hope that that'll have a knock-on effect on whether they break in the middle or out wide at some time.
Yeah, that ruck speed is huge, Mick. And when Ireland put in their best performances, you can always pretty much look down at the statistics afterwards and see the quick ball, that 0 to 3 second ruck ball, in and around 60 to 70% for some of those bigger games. For South Africa this weekend, if you can knock that down and put Ireland in around the 5-6 second bracket as much as you can, that's going a long way to neutralizing what Ireland have to offer, isn't it?
Definitely. Look, as BJ said there, the better Ireland's ball carry is, the easier the ruck is going to be. And that's always the way it's been in the game. If you get a positive carry, if you get your shoulders through that contact, you suddenly have guys having to backtrack that little bit. The guy going into jackal, unless he's sitting in behind the line, like the likes of, James Davies would have done for the Scarlets years ago. He had license to do that. You're always looking at quick ball. So this week is, in my opinion, from a phase play point of view, it's just about winning collisions. And I don't want to sound vague when I say that, because you could say that about all rugby matches, but playing against the likes of South Africans who are massive men, it's gonna be 2-man tackles. If we can get over the gain line early in the play, we can clean deep on the rucks. Jamison Gibson Park, if selected, he's just in there sweeping the ball away, getting the edges, moving the South African pack from side to side. I'd be hopeful that we can come away with the result that we'd like.
Yeah, and I know you say it's a bit simplistic just talking about the collisions, but it is something we often say with South Africa, where if you're identifying what you need to do to win, it's actually straightforward enough when you're talking about South Africa compared to what do we need to do to beat France, or what do we need to do to beat New Zealand. But the problem is, while it's easy enough to identify what you need to do, actually going and doing it is a hell of a different task.
Yeah, I think there's real purity to the way South Africa play. I think we've spoken about it before on this show. You know exactly what they're doing. You know exactly what their plan is. They're going to be very, very strong set piece, scrum and line out. They're going to be strong with the kick battle. They're going to be hard on the ball at the breakdown. And they're going to be very, very abrasive in the carry and contact. So I'd imagine Ireland are having the same conversations, but as you've mentioned there, it's just what you do to stop it.
Yeah, BJ, it's like even just to break it down to like a single person, it's like a few years ago when Cheslin Colby was at his best, and you knew when he got the ball out wide, all he was going to do was bring you to the touchline and come back in. And you were just waiting for him to do it, but 9 times out of 10, he was still able to do it.
There's no doubt about that. And I think that's why we get back to our earlier chat about when the opportunities come and they're ready to strike, they're going to have to then get those points on the board. There's not going to be, I think, in this game, the second, third, fourth opportunity, to make an error and work yourself back again. I think when the points are, it is a cliche, but when the points are there, you're going to have to make sure you take them and come away with that and build that score. But I think that's what Ireland have done well against South Africa as well. I mean, even during my playing days against Ireland, it was, one of the most irritating things ever, that you kind of would run away and you think, look at the scoreboard, there's a penalty kick. There's something that they come away with points, and then build it another 3 points and another 3 points. And then suddenly as forwards, you've actually felt like you've dominated the scrum and the lineout, and you look and you're 12 points down, all penalty kicks. And that is, partly what Ireland have done well. They do punish sides in the sense of, when they do get into the 22. However, as we've seen now in some parts, they have left with no points. So they can't afford that against South Africa. They're going to have that momentum. They're going to have that scoreboard ticking. and they're going to have to do it for 80 minutes, 80 plus minutes.
Mick, we couldn't let this episode pass without obviously acknowledging Johnny Sexton. Another 16 points at the weekend, 40 across the 2 games. And the all-important one as well is that try that he scored leapfrogged him ahead of Ronan O'Gara. He's Ireland's record point scorer of all time, up to 1,090 points in Test rugby for him in an Irish shirt. Obviously, his legacy in an Ireland jersey doesn't need to be explained in great detail. But in terms of the short term, we had question marks over. Well, maybe some of us had question marks. A lot of people probably didn't have question marks over how quickly he'd hit the ground running in these 2 games. But he looks sharp and he looks dialed in at the moment.
He's incredible. He's incredible. And, the biggest compliment he can be paid, in my opinion, is that he just makes all of his teammates look so good. There's a selflessness to the way he plays, obviously, in terms of how close he takes it to the line, to the gaps that he's putting his teammates through. Obviously, in previous years, he's taken unbelievable punishment in games as a result of going that close to the line. And I'd say this weekend is going to be no different. As I've said it before in the show, like in most games, you're going in targeting the 10 or, targeting a playmaker in terms of, okay, we're going to need to put a shot on this guy pretty early. With how close Johnny takes it to the line, I'd imagine he's in line for a fairly serious amount of punishment this week against Springboks. Legally, I'll say.
BJ, he's a bit like yourself, where when he is retiring, he was not showing his age whatsoever. He was looking as sharp as he ever did when he's hanging up those boots.
I don't know. Yeah, look, Johnny's, he's just keeps on going, and he's, as I said, he's really on form now, and I think he's a pivotal, part of the Irish side. And as Mick said, now he's got the ability to take the ball to the line, which they need to against South Africa, and then if not, put himself in the pocket. And accurate. His kicking game is really accurate, or cross kick, and he seems to have a lot more time. We've seen obviously what South Africa did with Finn Russell, against Scotland, and I think Johnny just has that experience of finding that little bit, a couple of extra seconds to make those decisions. There are going to be times when he is going to stand up and lie down for a couple of seconds, and this is going to happen because it's South Africa. But I think he's just shown that ability to kind of be resilient and keep on going and managing his side, and he's really doing that well. The passing, the kicking, it's just flows when he's on the field, and you can see that from an opponent's perspective, and from the TV.
Standing opposite him on Saturday, we presume, is going to be Manny Libbok. Rassie Erasmus yesterday said Handré Pollard won't be involved this weekend. BJ, as a South African, would you be more confident with Manny Libbok standing there as we expect, or are you surprised that Rassie has come out so early and said Handré Pollard isn't going to be involved this weekend, having called him up?
No, I'm not surprised. I think, Manny Libbok's been there. He's played the 2 games now, building up to the World Cup. He's been the number 10, and I think it would be kind of, from a team perspective, looking at the game itself and how they manage it and what Handré would bring. I think Handré is maybe, needs maybe a little more game time, and, moving into the World Cup where you might, use him later. I think he's made the right decision there. I think, Manny Libbok has shown, he's solid in defence. He brings that lineup, but at times, I suppose the questions have been asked about his kicking game, but we've discussed that, I think, and we do have Faf and Cheslin if they, kind of take up the kicking role. So look, that's the one area I would say with obviously the difference between Handré is just his record kicking, and I think that's one area that will be a big part of this game. But I suppose Rassie's taken those calculated risks in regarding selecting Manny.
Yeah, like you said there, calculated risk. But if for example this weekend the game comes down to a poor missed kick, or if it comes down to a crooked line-out throw at a crucial stage from someone like Dion Fourie, you say it's a calculated risk, but Rassie Erasmus and Jack Nienaber, they've opened themselves up to a lot of criticism if some of these selection calls come back to bite them in the backside over the next few weeks.
Yeah, I think that is 100% true, and I think they sit with that on the other side of the fence. if they pay off. And I think
They're
that's
geniuses. Yeah.
that's the thing. It's it's that scale, tipping point. And then they're geniuses. And I think they're on that point, I think we're going to see probably something we haven't seen before in the World Cup, as well, as they always bring something else, and I'm sure Ireland never, but so they go with this, and I think they've got that plan in place. I don't just think they're kind of quite reactive. They're quite proactive in how they plan their way forward, and we've seen before how these things seem to kind of work out. So look, all to see on the weekend anyway.
Yeah, it's never straightforward. Final couple of points on this game, Mick. As we said, South Africa will name their team this evening. Ireland naming their team on Thursday. We presume it's going to be a fairly settled side, but on a couple of selection things, presuming Dan Sheehan is fit and ready to play this weekend, who's your number 2 and who's your number 16 on the team sheet? Because obviously Dan Sheehan has proved over the last 18 months how good he is. Ronan Kelleher had a really, really strong 40 minutes at the weekend, but obviously has the injury risks over the last couple of years. Rob Herring, then, someone we've spoken about over the last few weeks, I think the last time you were on as well, he has just been Mr. Consistent for probably 12 months now in an Ireland shirt.
Yeah. Sheehan to start, anyway. That would be my first call. The Ronan Kelleher, Rob Herring one is a real brain teaser, in the sense that there's kind of subplots to it. Obviously, Rob Herring is Irish and he's played for Ireland and all the rest, but there is the added motivation of him being born in Cape Town, and the idea of playing against his home country or his country of birth. If you speak to the likes of Richard Strauss, who's done it in the past, he tell you it's a game that he couldn't have been more up for, from a motivation point of view. And that's not to say that Ronan Kelleher won't be up for the biggest game of the World Cup so far. But if I was choosing who was going on the bench, I'd probably go with Rob Herring for that reason, just because I feel that, he'll have that added bit of motivation, that added bit of, prove a point to family and mates back in South Africa, not to prove a point to anyone in Ireland, because that obviously doesn't need to be done.
And it would be well deserved from BJ, obviously.
Yeah, and I agree with Mick. Not only that, from a motivation perspective, but I think Rob is kind of a much stronger scrummager technically, and experience obviously up front is going to be key there. So for me, there's no doubt you'll put him there, and he's been consistent. He's been consistent in that position, and that's what you require against South Africa, coming off the bench. Even if you are going to be, who knows you're going to be up against. But I think I would also go with Rob.
And as quickly as you can try explain it, Mick, the other selection call that's probably crept up on us is Conor Murray potentially making a push to get back into the starting team, or would you still have Jamison Gibson-Park to wear number 9 and Murray to fulfill the kind of game manager role off the bench?
Yeah, it's tough. I actually think I'll throw another kind of curveball in at the end, but I'd go with Jamison Gibson-Park just for his ability to move the ball. If we do win collisions in attack, I think, we do kind of get South Africa in the back foot. I think Jamison Gibson-Park is the man to play 9 for that game. As the game goes on, if we're 50, 60 minutes in, I think it's a great time to bring Conor Murray on, just with the level of control that he has around the game, particularly around his kicking game. Like the charge down that he had against Tonga the other day, I think that's like the second time I've ever seen him be charged down in the game. So it's a credit to his ability around that area. And then just the curveball is who's going to play 7?
Okay, yeah, I did have that on the list, but I was trying to move through it quickly. BJ, obviously, we spoke about this at the weekend or last week when you were on with us about the potential for playing maybe Joe McCarthy or Ian Henderson in the second row and playing Byrne in the back row, one of O'Mahony or Van der Fleer at blindside. You suggested last week, if you were as a South African, you would much rather see something like that than come up against the traditional pack we've been used to seeing. What way are you feeling on those kind of things, Mick?
I probably would be inclined to move Tig to 6 and have Pete at 7. But that's purely from a line-out point of view. You obviously you've 4 very good options line-out-wise there.
World Player of the Year, Josh van der Flier on the bench, Mick. The bold one.
Oh, it's a huge call. It's a huge call, and I don't envy Andy Farrell having to make it. The only thing I would say is that Josh would be like a coiled spring coming on for the last 25, 30 minutes. Big risk. But this week in particular, in my opinion, it's no set piece, no win. Everything else is, I'm a second row, so I'm slightly biased here, but in my mind, everything else is fairly irrelevant.
How are you feeling on that, BJ?
I think that's exactly what we've just mentioned there. And you think about the depth, and kind of I've always spoken about the, to the extent the Irish bench, and what we've just mentioned, Van der Flier coming off the bench shows that, I suppose, kind of depth we're talking about, and, World Player of the Year and all the rest of it, but that squad performance that they will require against South Africa, because we know what's coming off the bench. And yes, Marks isn't there, but the rest are. And so Van der Flier coming off the bench, I mean, what do you if you have it the other way around, you kind of having guys that, yes, of course, massive experience come off the bench, you just don't have these kind of maybe game breakers that you probably rely on. So I think that'll be, a great setup. And as we said, as we've seen time and time again, how the bench changes the game, that could be the one that, kind of helps Ireland.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see. I'll put you on the spot. Last word on Ireland, South Africa. Give us a verdict for the weekend in as few words as possible.
Myself first.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, I think I would say that I'm going to go with South Africa. And the reason is obviously because I think that South Africa, as much as I think, Ireland have decided to do it, that South Africa understand and know how to win these games. So close out these games and know and have been in these positions before, especially in a World Cup. For me, that's the kind of psychological, mental side of things. And I think that's will be their kind of way that get around and beat Ireland. Now, again, I might be talking different next week, but look, I think Ireland is going to be a massive challenge for South Africa, not taking that away. Huge challenge. And I think they're going to be challenged South Africa all over the field. But I just think that South Africa will have, that mental side of things, that they've been here before, know how to understand how to win these games, and then kind of move on from there.
Mick?
I'm going to say Ireland by 3. That's my prediction. I think the stadium's going to be absolutely hopping. Massive Irish support, and I'm kind of putting it down to weight of momentum as well, in the sense that Ireland have won, is it 14 in a row?
14
now. I see winning as being a massive habit, and I'm just hoping that they can get the job done this week and then have a nice week off for Scotland.
I'm sensing when you say a 3-point win, your 3-point win is along the lines of 1916 rather than 35-32, yeah?
I'd take 3-0, to be honest.
Well, right. That's that on Ireland, South Africa. We only have a few more minutes left, so we'll try to zip through this, but couldn't let the podcast go without talking about Fiji and Australia from Sunday afternoon. Fiji 22, Australia 15. On Thursday's pod, we all said last week it was the standout game of the weekend, and so it proved to be. Fiji first win against Australia in 69 years, and it has to be said, BJ, they were great value for it. Probably should have won by more, to be totally honest.
Yeah, just great scenes, and being coached by Simon Rawali and friends of them, and just so happy for the side and how they kind of come together and prepped and prepared. And I think you've seen some of the videos going out of them running up a hill together, and in Fiji somewhere, and the guys, just kind of, as I said, it's hats off to them, and going about this and beating Australia, which obviously, as we've known before, not in a good place, but it's still Australia, a side that they've tried to beat, as you say, for the last 69 years. So just great for them, and great for the nation, and happen in a place like with the World Cup as well. These are the stories that World Cups are made of, as we've seen in years, as we've seen in cups before.
And what was so great as well, I thought, was it just summed up that this is the newer, modern Fiji, the well-rounded team. What iced the game ultimately, Mick, was a dominant scrum, shoving Australia off the ball, and it just summed up how far they've come. Where we know they can score tries for fun from all over the pitch, but it was that sort of stuff that we questioned them for so long, and it was great to see the game iced because of something like that.
Absolutely. I think on top of that, BJ would be able to attest the fact that they pushed him off that scrum with a tight head who'd played the guts of 80 minutes, just made it all the more impressive. Like, I'd say your man didn't know where he was at that stage of the game. In that heat against an Australian side that were coming hammer and tongs, I think everyone worldwide was just delighted to see them getting the win, particularly after being robbed blind against Wales last week. I'd say, not to, refereeing's very tough job. I'm not on this podcast to blag them by any means, but I'd imagine Matthew Carley had a fairly rough review after that one. So I was delighted to see them get the win. And like, Fiji have a population of 900,000 people. It's hard to even imagine how much those lads have inspired the next generation of Fijian kids at home, and that's what it's all about, really. So it was brilliant.
The other side of it then is just how disjointed and poor Australia looked. Like, I don't want to take anything away from Fiji, and as I said, they should have won by more. It was probably just the nerves that allowed Australia back into it in the final quarter. But you look through that Australia performance, BJ, conceding 18 penalties. I think more than half of those were in attacking situations when they had the ball. Their understanding of the breakdown looked non-existent. They couldn't get on the same page as Andy Brace, I think it was, who was refereeing. And then this game against Wales, this coming Sunday evening, if they lose that, they could be all but out of the competition. It is set up to be an absolutely gripping game this weekend. Maybe not the best quality of matches, but just enthralling in its own right.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And it's quite evident, that there's an unhappy camp in the Australian, kind of camp. And we can see that, we've seen that from the Rugby Championship coming to the World Cup, and, players that have been left off, not taken with, and kind of, and it's that key is the aspect of building a team and bringing them to a tournament like the World Cup, the pinnacle. So we've seen that on the field now, and penalties and these in-house things, show on the field. So, for me, and I suppose as we just touched on Wales there, Wales have done what they've done usually, is find a way to win, and kind of they're 2 from 2. So momentum coming in this, and I don't see Australia having the team to kind of, get one over Wales, even though that kind of Portugal took them to kind of a tough place at times. Portugal played some unbelievable rugby. It was a great game to watch, actually, from Portugal perspective. But I still think, Australia just don't have that side to kind of, I think, get one over Wales. I just think they're really in disarray. And even you would see, would they have a reaction to this? I just don't think they've got that set piece side of things and the cumulative game to beat Wales.
Yeah, and with Fiji having picked up 2 bonus points against Wales as well, they're in a really, really strong position. Finally, quick word, Mick, what way are you leaning for that game, Wales and Australia, at the weekend?
I think Wales will do it. And I think they'll actually do it comfortably enough. Warren Gatland will have a plan going into this game. It's obviously a huge game, as you've mentioned. I think they'll be dominant around the set piece. They'll be really hard at the breakdown with the likes of Morgan, Rafael coming off the bench, Faletau, and with Australia, just going back to them, they look like a team that don't have a huge amount of cohesion at the moment. Obviously, they picked a very young team. And I think teams that give away that many penalties, give away 15, 16, 17 penalties in a game, it's a sign of a team that are desperate, just desperate to make something happen. And unfortunately for them, they just haven't been able to do that so far in the competition.
Yeah, it would be an absolutely incredible fallout if they were to lose this weekend. Guys, we're completely out of time. Mick and BJ, thanks a million for joining us on the pod again, as usual. Before we go, here's what you have to look forward to over the next few days. The Rugby World Cup back up and running tomorrow, Wednesday, Italy against Uruguay. That's going to be an interesting one in Pool A, given what Uruguay did against France last Thursday. That's 4:45 Irish time kickoff. On Thursday, then, France take on Namibia, 8 o'clock kickoff. That's live on RT2 and RT Player, as is Argentina against Samoa at 4:45 p.m. on Friday evening. On Saturday, then, Georgia and Portugal meet in Pool C at 1 p.m. England and Chile at 4:45 in Pool D, before Ireland taking on South Africa in Stade de France. That is an 8 o'clock kickoff, live on RT2 and RT Player as well, as is on Sunday, Scotland against Tonga, 4:45 kickoff, followed by that game, as we were mentioning, Wales and Australia, 8 p.m. kickoff. We will be back for another RT Rugby podcast, or Rugby World Cup podcast, I should say, on Thursday afternoon after Ireland name their team to take on South Africa. So we'll speak to you then.
The RTÉ Rugby World Cup podcast, sponsored by Bank of Ireland.